What we're going to do is we're going to chat individually, then we're going to chat together, and then if you've got any questions, that would be great. Bear in mind that such talented documentary makers all in the same room together is very rare, so if you've got questions, maybe you can think about them now, and we'll come to them in the fullness of time. Let's start with Nick, should we? Have documentaries become movies? And if they have, do you make movies or documentaries?
Well, I always thought of them as films. And so they kind of like, they have a narrative and you make them about characters and there's a arc to the characters. And yes, I think they are, and they're doing very well now. I think they're in cinemas and there's so many outlets for, you know, feature-length documentaries that you can do that. But I think there's also a place for them on television, and I think television's become a lot more relevant too. So I think these things I think they're all about storytelling, and I think that narrative form is very useful because it involves an audience.
Talk to us about your storytelling and how you moved from social issues to exploring dangerous places, if you will.
Well, you know, I in a way feel I'm on the wrong panel because I think these people have all made incredibly brave, dangerous films, and I've only made them by complete default. I've been more like a Caruso character who's got caught in these places. I mean, I remember the first thing I did, mainly because I'd been expelled from school, was I'd sent off with a film crew, and I was kind of the boom operator. And I was sent out, I'm just giving you an example of how I ended up my first war zone. I ended up in Beirut. And the hotel was so dangerous that none of the journalists ever left during the day. They always used to take bets on who would get to the corner before they got shot. And then everybody in the evening in the cocktail lounge would concoct the news. They'd say, well, what are you going to phone back? And they'd all sort of get the same kind of stories so no one really got into trouble. And then they'd all kind of work out what the story was going to be. And I thought, this should be the film. This is so hilarious. This is kind of, and there's always that kind of comedic aspect of war, which in a way was the thing that always made me more interested. So, you know, The Leader, the Driver is a kind of black comedy about the white right, because I think the character of people is so amazing, and it's the humor in all these situations that kind of makes it, well, it's the humor that enables everyone to get through it. Yeah. I mean, I love that humor in your little clip there. And so I've always more concentrated on that. And I think, you know, the biggest danger actually I had in Beirut was the sound recorders, I think, wanted me to do things other than boom swinging. And that got me into going to film school and, you know, actually learning the trade a bit better. But
that's something that you're known for, isn't it? I mean, the rawness and the boom mic being in shot and that sort of thing. You leave in what conventional filmmakers, documentary makers would leave out. Why do you do that?
Because I think often what we go through to get into these situations is so revealing in and of itself. And you make the most unlikely alliances doing that. I mean, you were talking about the guys who are going to take over Afghanistan now, and the relationship you had to have with them to make the film. And I think it's all those unlikely alliances you make, and that it is the humor and the absurdity often that defines the subjects better than anything else. I mean, I'm sure you can all talk. Well, you should mention that.
Well, I did a film about a town in Helmand province where there's been more fighting than anywhere else in Afghanistan that was handed over to the Afghan security forces. And I knew it was going to be bad, but didn't quite know how bad. And we had to film with the police force who justified in the worst language possible the abduction, rape and murder of young boys, who they would abduct them and then make them into slaves, sex slaves and chai boys. You know.
And yet you were having to work with them.
Yeah, I mean, I was living on the same base as them, day in and day out, and to them it was the most normal thing in the world. And you often find yourself hanging out with characters just like I just did the same thing in Iraq with a guy whose favourite method of killing people is an electric drill. And he's now leading the fight against ISIS in Iraq.
And it's because, and I guess when I did The Leader, the Driver, the only reason we didn't get beaten up was because we'd become great friends with Blanche's security forces, you know, because we all hung out in the kitchen together and made tear gas and spent our time doing stupid things with them. So they really liked us. And when some of his supporters wanted to beat us up, they were the ones who protected us. So you're constantly having to make these weird alliances, aren't you? And that's what makes you safe.
Yeah. I think sometimes the making of the documentary is equally, if not more, as interesting as what you initially set out to do.
Yeah.
So I think it really works brilliantly, the making being part of the film itself.
So does time spent with contributors like Ted Blanchard or whoever, however nuts, produce a clearer story for those that want to watch?
Well, yeah, absolutely, because I think that's how you really get the information and the real story. But you have to also have the budget to do that. And I think the trouble with a lot of, journalists is that they have very little time. They have a big deadline. They've got to get their story out there. And to a certain extent, they just have to go along with the official line because that's where the information is. If you want to get the story on the street, you've got to spend real time with the people, and they've got to like you or be amused by you or something in order for them.
That alliance you're talking about, probably all agree, is that time creates that alliance.
Yeah.
You have to get to actually like them in a way, even though you maybe abhor what they do. You have to show a sympathy and also hopefully not be balanced in the way that you show it. It's up to the audience to work that one out, isn't it? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Often I don't know, but in past experience, often I spent some time with a family in Chicago and their 20-year-old had been shot in the head, and it was only a month after, so it was still incredibly raw. And there were a couple of days, we only had 2.5 weeks, but there were a couple of days when we'd turn up and Mum just wasn't talking, she was silent, and that was fine. We just sat with her, but we had a few days, thankfully, to get closer. If we didn't have that time, for sure we would never have spoken to her.
And that film you made in Beirut, you could easily make that film again today. And I use that to my advantage, the fact that news reporters often turn up for 10 hours just to get the shot of them in the flak jacket somewhere vaguely frontline-y. And I say, I want to spend 5 weeks with you. And they're very impressed by that. And as a result, you get good access.
What support do you get from Vice?
It's the same as the support I got from the BBC. You do a hostile environment training course once every 3 years.
I think we've all done that.
Yeah, where once I was told to run across a field in zigzags while someone fired blanks at me, and just ridiculous. And yeah, my first war was Liberia, and at one point I was surrounded by 300 or 400 child soldiers, off their heads on coke and weed and drunk, and with snakes around their necks, and AKs and RPGs. And I thought, I'm on my own here.
But at least you've done your HEFAT course, so you'll be able to deal with it.
Yeah, the first aid
across that field.
yeah. But you are on your own. You think there's this huge organisation. One of the things I thought when I joined Vice was I'm going to lose the support of the BBC, but actually the support is no different at all. You are completely alone in these situations, and maybe 10 hours or 4 days or 5 days later you can get some support. And if you get taken hostage, for example, the same guy gets called to do the negotiations, but that's whoever you're working with, that same guy gets called to lead the negotiations. So in terms of danger, I don't get any less support from Vice. In terms of storytelling and telling very difficult foreign stories, I get far more support. They've completely ignored. Well, they're not even aware of the rule that says young people don't care about international current affairs. They think if 500 kids dying in Sudan is just as important as 500 kids dying here, or any of the other many examples. So in the last 2 years, you mentioned, it's about 24 films, I don't know. I've been to Yemen, Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan several times, Sudan. I never did that many trips and that many films for the BBC, just because it was so hard to get these tough foreign stories commissioned.
But is online a better place? Well, it's certainly a different place, but is it a better place to tell stories?
I think in the future, I think there are some docs that make it to the cinema and they have a fantastic life, and everyone, they get, people pay attention to them in the way they never pay attention to TV and stuff online. If you don't make it to the cinema, then I think online has to be the future, because people under the age of 30 now, they're not willing to sit down at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night and watch whatever program. They haven't even seen the advert for the program. They want to see it on whatever device they have right away. And it also allows us a flexibility in that if I go somewhere and make a film and don't get that much, I might make an 8-minute film. If I go somewhere and get tons, I can make a 90-minute film. And both those things have happened over the last 2 years. There's no, the clip you showed, that's actually a mistranslation of what the policeman said, because it was the BBC before 9 o'clock. So we had to tone down his language. The language he used to justify the rape and murder of young boys was much worse than that. On the Vice version, which was a 90-minute long film, I got to put it out there, word for word, and show it in its full horror. That's the other advantage.
And that was to say that they were using their boys rather than using their grandmothers.
Yeah. And you know, I couldn't show that on the BBC. And I couldn't show the visit of the ambassadors on the BBC documentary because there wasn't time. And that the British and American ambassadors went to the base there, which is a very safe place, and refused to talk to the Marine who was dealing with that policeman, and instead spoke to the guy who'd never left the base and said, things are going great here, the police are doing a brilliant job. And their helicopter was delayed because they landed, spoke to someone for an hour, and then were going to fly off again. And the helicopter was delayed because of a sandstorm or something. So I said, go and talk to that guy there. He'll tell you what's really going on, 500 meters away from this base. And they weren't interested. And I got to show that in the longer film, which I did for Vice, and I couldn't show it in the shorter film, which I did for the BBC.
The thing with Vice, though, and the thing with online, is that it's not regulated.
Well, YouTube and places like that aren't so regulated. Vice, I have exactly the same controls that I would have anywhere else. You know, I have to get something past a lawyer, past an executive producer. So I'm not aware of being any less constrained online than I am anywhere else. And most of my stuff that I do for Vice ends up on HBO, which has all the same regulations in the States. So I can't talk to other people who do stuff online. For us, I would say the restrictions are exactly the same as they were before, or the controls are just the same as they were
And
before.
is it cheap and risky, or is it exciting and liberating for a lone reporter to go out to Helmand or wherever it is that you choose to go?
It's liberating, but it's not exciting at all. When people say you must be an adrenaline junkie, and I think any war, I don't like the phrase war reporter, but the war reporter who says it's exciting, I think hasn't been close enough and hasn't seen the horrors. I see each trip almost as an endurance test.
You were embedded with the Marines?
With Marines, with the Brits, with the
Tell us
Afghan
about
army.
the last gig you did when you were out with the Marines for 6 weeks, was it? Something like that, when they were leaving Afghanistan?
The last one I did with the Marines was the one you saw the clip of.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I spent 6 weeks with them. I was completely alone with them. And when you say to someone, I'm willing to sleep how you sleep, eat the same crappy food you eat, stay with you no matter what happens, they like that so much. They like the fact you're going to show how hard it is for them. They don't really care about the politics of what your film will say. And you know, they respect my opinion and let me say whatever I want. So I get the complete freedom. With the US Marines, it's not like that with the US Army or the US Navy. It's a lot more restricted, and a lot more restricted, as you can probably say, with the British Army. And you have a government, I had a government minder with me at all times.
They're always really handy, aren't they?
Oh, you know.
So I didn't get that. I didn't have that at all. We were allowed over from 2007 through to 2011, 12. The first trip out there, they were very wary. And as the war got worse for us, the more they probably thought, because we were embedded and it was Grant Mitchell telling a hooray story, which it wasn't, because we were allowed to show as it happened. And you know, I didn't do it as long as embedded, but a month, 2 months, a year out there is a long time, you know, for anyone. And they do far longer, but they don't do it repetitively. And what I was actually surprised by was that there were no government minders with us. We flew eventually, when Kandahar closed, or they could land large aircraft at Bastion, I would leave Bryce once we got on a flight, land in Bastion, and within an hour I'd be out on the flat for a line of enemy troops, which is a bit of a shocker.
I've never heard of anyone else not having a government minder with the British forces, and I was actually banned from going out with the Brits from 2007 onwards. They wouldn't let me go out with them at all. Really? Yeah. And they'd string me along.
But with the US Marines, I would agree with you, because having gone out with the US Marines, they were very, very relaxed in terms of their attitude. The brave and the few, but bear in mind that those few are larger than our Navy, our Air Force, and our Navy combined.
I want to look at a clip from Battle for Marja near to Helmand, a Channel 4 feature-length film, I think,
Channel 4
wasn't
and HBO.
And HBO, and this involved a condolence payment. Let's have a quick look. What had happened to his child?
It was 3 children and his sister were all killed when the Marines hit the wrong house with a rocket. And the Marine you see at the end saying, "I'm deeply, deeply sorry," was the most intelligent Marine I'd ever met. He was inspired by Christopher Hitchens, went out there really thinking he was, you know, fighting the good fight against Islamic fascists, as he called them. So yeah, him having to go and apologise for killing 3 kids and a woman and injuring, I think, 16 others as well, was incredible. And that I only got access to that meeting because I'd been there for 5 weeks with them, and it had been the first 4 or 5 days had been fighting all day long, and very good Taliban snipers who'd killed Marines. And I said, I knew I was there when they'd killed the kids and the woman, and I knew there'd be this meeting with the condolence payment, because funny enough, I'd filmed the same meeting with the British in 2007, which is one of the reasons I wasn't allowed to go out with the British ever again. And I said to the Marines, I want to come with you when you meet the family, fully expecting them to say, oh, I'm sorry, it happened already, you were somewhere else, we couldn't find you. And they actually came to get me to make sure I was at that meeting and let me show the whole thing. And afterwards, the family took me to the room next door and showed me the bodies of the 3 kids and the sister. And I thought I'd already intruded too much, so didn't film it. And I really regret doing that, because they wanted their story to be told in all its horror. And I said, no, thank you very much, and left. But I wish I had done, I wish I had filmed it. But that shows the difference between the US Marines and the experiences I've had with the British Army in terms, they really are willing to let you show everything.
Do you want to pick up on that?
I never had that. I mean, we showed the stuff that we got. Maybe we were given a lot more access in some points. It was trust with the Brits, I found. And I think obviously that trust closed down when the wind changed and they realised that we were going to leave. I definitely think that we were monitored and we were pushed into areas where they wanted to show a success story. And as the area of our operations slowly reduced, we got put to where they wanted success stories. And I would agree with you on that towards the end of my time. But with the US Marines, yeah, we were given, we were just outside of Musakala, I was talking to you earlier about it. And yeah, it was very raw. And they weren't very happy about us being there, to be honest, but they weren't happy at all. They used to throw rocks into our little bivvy at night and curse us while we were on the ground. And there was a lot of dissension in the ranks, and they were having a very unhappy tour.
Stacey, can we talk to you about what you look for in a story that perhaps others can't find?
I mean, it's a huge privilege to be trusted with such hard-hitting subjects, So whenever I go there and I'm on location, I just look for the most interesting, most fascinating characters, the contributors that are going to really tell us what life is really like for them. And then, you dedicate all of your time and all of your efforts to make sure that, they do feel comfy and, they are going to open up. And I think that's when you build a relationship with somebody, I think that's when you get the truest, sort of most accurate information, and you can show the viewers, this is what their life is like. What do you reckon?
Do you come up with the ideas? Or initially, you were telling me, again, a little bit earlier on, that ideas were given to you and you went, yeah, that's great, let's do that. But that's evolved.
Yeah, I think it probably does with many people naturally. When I started, it's no secret, I was 20 years old, I could barely string a sentence together. And now I know how telly works. I can just imagine the producers and directors rubbing their hands in glee. Every time I opened my mouth, it was like, soundbite, soundbite, soundbite. And then when I was given the opportunity to get 2 commissions, I just felt so honoured. So when you first start out, you will say yes to all of the work, and you're so appreciative. But as you learn how the industry works and what you find most interesting, and people come up to you on the street and say, X, Y, and Z, oh my God, I had no idea, then you are able to pitch ideas and have more editorial input, which is brilliant.
You obviously need your work to inform the audience, but when you're home again and you're with your mum and you're chatting and what, do you feel that your work has changed the lives of some of the people that you've left behind? And how do you feel about the people that you've left behind?
I hope so. I mean, because
you don't always tell her where you've gone, do you?
No, that's right. Yeah, my mum, when I was in Mexico, so I was in Sinaloa, Michoacan, I was filming with El Chapo's crowd, and it was so frightening. Like, I've never felt, and this isn't a topic, I've never felt like I was going to die more than I did in Mexico. A week before, there were like French journalists' heads placed on the bus stop, and there were journalists kidnapped the day before, hanging upside down naked. It was real. So I didn't tell my mum. I said, I'm in San Diego. And what's brilliant is that she always says, how was your holiday? And I say, because I've got on a plane, it's like a holiday. I say, oh, it was fine.
The trouble with that approach is they then see the films.
Well, this is it.
So then when you do go on holiday, they don't believe you.
Yeah, she's got the raging ump. But I like to, and I truly do believe, I like to think that, the people that we spend time with and we try and tell their stories do feel like, we are considered and we're approachable, and I hope that they feel like we've done them, justice, because some of the people are extremely vulnerable. They've been exploited their entire lives a lot of the time. So, they trust very few people. I'm sure you've all come across this. So, when I'm there and I'm saying, I really want to tell your story, I really mean it, and I hope that they are happy with the the finished result.
What about you, Ross? How do you feel when, in fact, I've seen you being interviewed about it before, when you've talked about some of the people that you've had to leave behind?
What, in terms of my personal view?
Yeah.
Somebody kills 200 kids. It's a sex trafficker. It's very hard, and I think I was very honest when we did the interview, and I said, get him out of my sight at the end of it. And I was in tears, and my translator was in tears. And Jonathan Young, you know, pretty hardened war cameraman, whatever you want to call him, you know, very emotional that moment. But then, you know, it is very hard not to judge.
Yeah.
But I think what I think you were talking about is, you know, it's not really our job to do that, I don't think. I think an audience will get the way that I feel, and that maybe that's my job as a conduit, to interview someone and get my feelings may come through, but ultimately it's to find out as much about that person as possible and to lay them as bare as you can, as quickly as you can, the time allowed, and get them to be as honest as they possibly can be. And I think that's a skill that everybody in this room has, on this panel has, including you, when you do interviews. And unfortunately, I think time plays a part in it sometimes for me, because we have to get our shows out by a certain time, or we have a limited amount of time in a certain area that we're in, because kidnap threats, because of upsetting the wrong people, you know, what time are you going to spend with the police, and are you going to raid the people that you were just in the houses with only 4 days ago? Or, you know, one instance in the Rye Valley, you know, we went to see a Coke factory, you know, Piscina, making Coke. We did that one day. We're about to leave San Francisco, not San Francisco with the Golden Gate Bridge.
I think we had the same fixer.
Did we?
Yeah.
So that happens a lot. Got to get him first. Fixers, but those people are very important.
I said, I haven't met him yet, but when I do.
No. But the fact was that we then arranged to meet with the military before we left to show how they were controlling the situation and how they were part of what was going on. And there were 1,000 Coke labs in that valley. They took us to one, and at that point I said, we're not going. And then we had to exfil not only the fixer but also the guy that, you know, that ran the factory, get him and his family safe. So you take on a bit of responsibility when you start delving into other people's lives. I think you have to be really, really considered in the way that you do it, and you have to be prepared to make sure that when you leave the place that you've been into, you have upset it as less as you possibly can do. Because the worst thing I want to do is make the situation of someone who's living in abject poverty or in pain or fear any worse because a TV crew stamped all over it.
Should that sort of journalism only be available online in the future? I'm talking, of course, about BBC Three and what's going to happen there. And how do you feel about that?
I feel very excited about the future, and I truly do mean that. BBC and BBC Three specifically have been utterly brilliant to me. They've given me an entire career, and you know, it was very brave of them to do that, because I was a 20-year-old shop assistant from Luton Airport. But you know, I was inquisitive, I was curious, and I did think it was amazing that we had all of these countries around all of the world going through such, you know, different experiences to ourselves. And I thought, well, you know, if I didn't know that, you know, perhaps other people my age and in my generation aren't as aware. So for them to, you know, commission me to 60 Minutes was quite something. That was Danny Cohen, you know, he's been brilliant to me, and I've continued to have a great relationship. Zai was awesome. You know, I get on very well with Damien. He's excited about the future as much as I am. I think it's, you know, inevitable. We will all be online in the future. So I think we're just getting a head start. I'll still be making long form stuff, but I'm going to try the short form too.
When they announced that they were killing off the BBC, I think is what BBC Three, I think is what they said.
Total nonsense.
Yeah, I thought it was the worst handled announcement ever, because they're not killing it off, they're making it into the model which every channel is going to be in the very near future. Everything is going to be available online on any device very soon, and that's all they were doing with BBC Three. Not killing it off at all.
I heard somebody recently say platform is queen but content is king, and as long as you still have that content, it doesn't actually matter as much what the platform is.
And you know, we will have so much freedom. Like Ben said earlier, you know, sometimes a BBC hour is a long old hour. You know, you're in the edit and you've got 50 minutes of brilliant stuff, but then you're rattling around trying to find these next 7-8 minutes. You know, with our content that will be online, we won't have to do that. We will just pick out the absolute best interviews, the best contributors, we'll put it together, and if it's 30-40 minutes, there you go. No, the viewers don't care how long it is. They don't care where it's shown. If it's good, they'll watch it.
Can I talk about audiences with you, please, Ross. I mean, you were shot at by the Taliban. Given your previous...
So was he.
Yeah, yeah. Your previous
else.
incarnation, though, I mean, is there a worry that audiences don't realise that that potential danger is real?
Do you know what? I think audiences are far more intelligent than that. I think they know. Now I think they've got... Look at the way that we interact with each other now. I think people are totally aware of your vulnerability. You don't need to enhance it or act it. You know, I think people know when you're telling the truth, and they can see through people who aren't. I don't think you should ever underestimate your audience. You know, I think people know when you're being genuine. I'm honest. When I get shot at, I say the F word, because if it's very close and it zips close, your natural reaction is sometimes to laugh or just to expletive, and you can't make that up. And someone once suggested to me, why don't you go to a helmet and shoot it in 3D? I always got the image of me going, Taliban, can we go again, please? I think audiences are very bright, and they know when you're vulnerable and when you're showing honest emotion.
Is there a secret to making good documentaries or films?
Don't ask me, ask Nick.
Well, I'm asking you, and then we'll open it up because, of course,
Is there a secret? I think
you are award-winning.
Work with people that you trust. I think the biggest difference in terms of my turn of career is that I not even trust the people I work with, but there are far more things on the line here. There's no film ever worth making that was worth someone's life. You don't harm the people that you intrude into their lives. You try and leave them in the same state or hopefully slightly better. And the secret is to tell the truth and try to be as unjudgmental as you possibly can do.
Ben's spot on as well, though. You know, with your contributors, they really appreciate it when you just live the life with them. I remember one time I was at this like highbrow do, and there was this news journo, and he was saying, you know, we're not there to live the story. We're there to fucking tell it. And I remember thinking, you sound like such a moron, actually, because you probably...
Did you tell him, Stacey?
I should have. Yeah. But, you know, you're on screen saying, you know, this is horrendous and this girl's been through, you know, horrific circumstances. You know, so the sincerity is vital.
The empathy is created by that.
Do you have golden rules that you work with, Nick?
Well, I think the most interesting thing about all people is that they're full of contradictions. I mean, you can make a film about someone like Eileen Wuornos, who is branded, you know, America's first female serial killer, and yet you can make a very empathetic, passionate film about her and leave an audience loving her at the end because of who she is. And so you need to obviously find that story and find that way of telling them. So I think as a filmmaker, because you have so long, I mean, I knew her for quite a long time, and you know, we wrote to each other and stuff, it was possible to reveal a whole other side. And I think you can do that. You can bring a very much more complicated way of understanding a situation than you can by writing an article or by just doing a short piece. So, you know, in Tales of the Grim Sleeper, you know, where I had enough time and enough of a budget, you know, and was very supported by Sky to do it. It was possible to
Why don't
really...
we have a look at that, and then we can talk about
sure.
it in more detail.
Yeah.
I think we've got a clip of that. Tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the bits I really remember, I mean, they're all terrible shots there, which is the only worrying thing about being there at that time, which is they're trying to shoot each other, but occasionally, if you move, I think you might get shot too. But what was incredible about doing that film was finding all these people who'd never told their story before, who had been, you know, victims of this guy, who the police weren't interested in dealing with, and having the time to really actually assemble what really happened, which had never been reported in any of the press. You know, the LA Times wasn't interested because they were black. They didn't sell newspapers. What it uncovered really was a whole system of looking. You know, there was this police attitude, NHI, which is slang for no human involved, and they would, if a black person was found in that area who was like crack addict or gang member, they were NHI, there were no human involved. So they would just rush it through as a John Doe or a Jane Doe, wouldn't really do proper forensics. And in that time, you know, what we discovered was like over 200 people had disappeared in the middle of Los Angeles over a 25-year period, you know, because of, so you have enough time to really get a very strong case or a very strong argument together, which is sort of undeniable. And I think, you know, when you have that opportunity, it's fantastic because you can really tell a great story and get the characters and personalities of the people out there, because an audience, you know, particularly in like white Los Angeles who never go into South Central, it's great if they actually love the people and feel something for them, and I think that's the way maybe change or debate can happen.
How long were you in post-production with that?
Well, because I made a couple of films in between, but it was shot over a year and a half. So that's a real luxury.
I was going to say, do you envy that gift of time?
I've had some films that we've managed to make over that length of time, but not often. And sometimes I think for some stories it's absolutely essential to have that length of time. And it's I think becoming much more difficult. But I mean, I saw a film recently called Keep On Keeping On about the relationship between a great jazz, Terry Clark, is it?
Yeah.
A great jazz trumpeter who mentors kids, and he's mentoring this blind pianist. And it was shot over 5 years, I think. And
How can it not be good, though, if you've got 5 years? You know what I mean?
But the relationship was
Or
so
you've
good.
got real problems.
Yeah.
And you know,
If you're giving me 5 years, you've got to give something good.
but I think everyone's got a few films like that in them where you feel so strongly about it that you will commit that much time and you will develop it over the years while you're doing other stuff as well, for sure. And especially for any young filmmakers here trying to break in, like you've probably got a story like that now in front of your nose that you could do, where you could get that kind of access. You could just be slowly working away and eventually it could turn into something great. And we've been talking a lot about how to get access to people and get them to trust us and film. I speak to the young filmmakers at Vice all the time, and I get them to watch your film about Terra Blanche. And the film is, and I might misremember this slightly, but the film is about getting access to Terra Blanche and getting this interview. And he keeps on saying, I'm too important for you, I'm too busy. And then you finally get the interview, and I think intentionally turn up late. And they start talking, and Terra Blanche says, can I just ask, sorry about my bad South African accent, why were you late to meet someone like me? And you sort of turn to the camera and say, I think we just stopped for a cup of tea, didn't we? And he goes nuts, he explodes. And you don't even show the actual interview, but just showing that reaction was so revealing. So I don't do things like that, like clever little things to really reveal things. But that, if for the masterclass part of this, watching that film is essential because it's so brilliant.
What are you going to do next?
I'm going to Brazil next week. So I just got back from Honduras and Philippines. They're really strong. I'm very proud of them. They were about sort of the brutality, the levels of violence for females in Honduras and paedophilia essentially in the Philippines. So Brazil's slightly different. It's looking at the sex industry, how it's changing. So Brazil, Russia, Turkey, and maybe Iran, visas permitting. So I'm very, very lucky, and I'm really
learning a bit of
thankful.
English as well, you were telling me.
Tell me?
They were learning a bit of English.
Exactly, yes. So some of the prostitutes in Brazil I've been reading, they've been learning the basic words necessary for the English
trade.
Customers when they go over next year. I think they're no more than 4 letters each word. But I'm looking forward to it.
I've been told that I can't ask you, Ross, what you're doing next, but that's always what I then say. What are you doing next?
Yeah, of course you can.
What are you doing next?
I'm doing 3 films in the UK, one about child sexual exploitation, one about alcohol abuse, and one about immigration. So we were in Calais last year, and we're sort of following it on. I mean, what happens to people? Everyone's up in arms, and naturally so, about what's going on across Europe, but no one has any solutions. It's also the fact that we have probably, no one knows, government statistics we think are out. I think there's probably around about 2 million people that are living in the UK that we have no idea about. So that black economy that exists, which makes a mockery of the minimum wage, etc. So looking at that, looking at how much we drink and how much effect it has on us as society, I think it costs us around £21 billion a year. And and looking at child sexual exploitation, the leading chief police officer, which is the chief of police for Norfolk, said we're at the tip of the iceberg, which is a big cliche. But I would suggest that we really have to look at what's happening to our young people and how quickly they're sexualised and how they're exposed to sexual imagery, vocabulary and pressure.
Time has absolutely flown. We've only got about 5 minutes left, so we'll maybe get some house lights, and if anybody's got any questions, now is the time. As I said, very unlikely that we'll have this sort of TV documentary and online documentary talent in the future, all in one stage, so now's the time. I think we've got a question here.
Yes, fascinating discussion. I'm curious to know, obviously you go to real extremities in your jobs. How do you adapt to normality after you've been to those places?
That's a great question. Who would you like to ask that to?
All of the panel.
Okay, that's easy. Nick, do you want to start?
I've never adapted. Well, I think, you have your... I mean, I think it's a strange role. I mean, the only film that really, really knocked me sideways, oddly enough, and it sort of crept up on me without me realizing, was the one about Eileen Wuornos, who was executed, and I was, she wanted me to go and see her in her last moments, and it was so depressing. I think, it was just the celebration of her death on the part of the authorities and Jeb Bush was so awful, and it really depressed me. Normally, I manage to stay pretty separated, and, I think having a family and kids and all those and I think also just reminding yourself you're in an incredibly privileged position, it's on you.
That's exactly it. It's a huge privilege for people to allow them into your lives. You know what I mean? You just turn up, you say what it is that you're after, and often that they're willing. And the paedophilia is very difficult for me to try and comprehend. I know we will never understand it, but sort of filming 14, 15 hours a day and listening to how 35-year-olds have sexually abused 3-year-olds is tricky. It's really hard, and then you go back to the hotel room and you have a cry, you call your boyfriend, you call your mum, and then you think, actually, their reality and your reality they will always be different worlds. So that's why I think, it's almost our responsibility to tell the stories, because they never will get the opportunity to do so. They won't.
What about you, Ben?
I find it very difficult. It's I've got a thing now. I try and spend 48 hours in a hotel room somewhere on the way back, and just sleep a lot and watch brainless movies. Yeah, and that helps. And then you can get into a stage where, similar to what you were both talking about, you can really appreciate just going out and buying a coffee and a croissant and reading the paper and realise how lucky you are. But when I'm out in these places, you have a list of things you want to do when you finally get home, and then you get home and it's a massive anticlimax. Yeah. And the new film or the new restaurant or whatever, it just feels boring. Because you were in a situation where there was this incredible life and death drama happening right in front of your nose, day in and day out.
Does that make you an adrenaline junkie?
Adrenaline. It's not exciting when you're there, but it still makes everything feel boring when you're at home. So you don't get the excitement, but everything feels boring when you get home. It's sort of a no-win. But that's the biggest struggle for me. And you don't feel like a very sort of sociable human being when you're in that mindset. I mean, you get over it after a few days usually, but sometimes it can stick for a while. And little tiny things, no phone reception, someone being a real, pain in the ass over the tiniest thing you can flip, because life should be so simple and so easy for us here, because, compared to 4 billion people or something around the rest of the world, we have it so easy, and yet it is often so difficult, so unnecessary, and you can find that quite difficult. And find people's lack of interest in these stories that can be frustrating sometimes as well, because from the age of 16 or 17, this is all I've ever wanted to do. And I'm still amazed that some of these stories aren't front page news every single day. And realizing that most people really don't think that way, that's tough. Because you sometimes feel like you're just preaching to the choir.
What about you, Russ? How do you decompress?
With Ben, it always used to help if he got stopover on the way back, because it gives you all a chance to debrief, to kind of trauma risk management. You kind of talk it through with people and you kind of debrief, which is always good. I think having a family, Nick says, I think that's something you miss and you want to get home to. I always remember this one. I was going out with a girl when I was going out to Afghanistan, and I got satellite meridian contact, and I rang her. I hadn't spoken to her in like 3 weeks, and the relationship wasn't going well, and I said, I couldn't tell where he'd been, but it had been like compound hopping for about 3 or 4 days, and we got back to the DC. And I got signal, and I rang, and I said, how are you? She said, the traffic on the M25 is appalling today. Yeah, and she said, you should have seen the queue in Tesco. And I was going, and you're never going to make that connection, so you shouldn't try. You do what you do, and when you get home, you have a little debrief. And I always make this dreadful kind of, particularly if a helicopter's got a malfunction or something goes wrong or it's close, and you go, I'll promise I will be good when I get back, and I will consider everybody, and I will not become another rat on the wheel. and within 3 weeks I'm back on that wheel.
Yeah, I know.
Like every
I
other
find
rat.
this by the time you get to baggage reclaim. And people like just push in, sliding.
That's spatial awareness thing.
Yeah.
Have we got one more question? Just here, the lady here.
That's
Just
so
here.
true.
Hiya, it's just
Hiya.
incredibly inspiring to hear you all talk, and I'm a bit like Stacey, I'm like an aspiring documentary maker myself. But what was striking me is that you guys talk about responsibility when you're out there. I just want to know kind of, do you have a cut-off point when you come back, or do you still keep in contact with contributors? Because obviously you do an awful lot, you go to an awful lot of places. Do you find it difficult to kind of leave them behind, or do you keep in contact and kind of make sure that actually they are okay? I don't know, it's kind of like
It's a good question. It's a good question, yeah. And also, I suppose it's not always possible, is it, Stacey, to keep in touch?
No, you're spot on. You're absolutely right. I mean, how I've gone about it, and I don't know whether or not it's the right way or the wrong way, but I keep the lines of communication open, and you know, then it's up to them if they, and especially now, you know, online, Instagram, Twitter, mail, all the rest of it. If they want to say to me, oh, you know, this has happened and she got shot and I'm doing okay, because you do grow quite pally with them, then you know, I absolutely respond, and you know, I'm still pally with a few of the contributors in America. I've got friends in Thailand, and you know, if they want to continue to talk, then absolutely we will always be friends. But there are other people, you know, there was a lad in the Congo that I grew really, really fond of, but I'm not even sure.
He's not going to be on
Well, yeah.
Facebook, is he? Let's be fair.
But I'm not even sure if he's alive or dead now, because the fixer, Jack, who was amazing and he was really, really helpful, he's moved. You know, he's now in Rwanda, so he's not able to go and check on him in the same way that they can sometimes. And you do, you know, when you're in the bath or when you're in bed, you think, oh, I wonder how Eileen's getting on, I wonder how Jack is, you know, you think all of these things. And again, it's that reality, isn't it? Our lives and our worlds are opposite ends of the spectrum.
I'm being told we've got time for one more question. Just here. Just here.
Yes, all four of you are lucky enough to go to dangerous places commissioned by media organisations who take responsibility for you, responsibility for getting you out if something goes wrong. But there are cases when people get into trouble without that kind of backup. In 2003, a young journalist called Richard Wilde was shot dead in Baghdad. No media organisation came forward to claim him. A number of people said, oh yes, he had contacted them before he went, and they said to him, if you get anything useful, bring it to us when you come back. And that's the basis he went on. So my question is, have you been in places where there are people there who you actually thought shouldn't be there?
Ben?
Yeah, and it's a growing problem there. It's very easy to buy a 5D now and shoot very high quality footage. And in Syria at one point, there were probably more kids like the ones you described than people who were there on behalf of an organisation. I don't know about everyone else, but the first clip you showed of the ambush where we dived into a ditch and there were rockets and bullets flying, I wasn't commissioned for that. I'd worked on getting access to this huge operation for 6 months. At the last minute, the BBC turned me down. I think because the BBC Kabul staff didn't get access to the operation, so it was done out of spite. But I don't know. So I had to go there without a commission, without insurance, and without any backing whatsoever. So everyone still has to do that. Sometimes I think. But sorry, in answer to your question, yeah, it's becoming a huge problem. I mean, now a lot of people are saying we won't take footage from you, no matter how good it is, but they will usually find a home somewhere. And if someone's hungry enough, then they'll still do it. My first 2 or 3 films were done in exactly the same way. And I say to people all the time, don't write a proposal and send it in. Make something and send it in, because then you're on the very small pile of people who have actually got something to show and see, rather than on the very large pile of people who are just talking about what they want to do one day. I wouldn't say go to Syria or Iraq, but I would say go out and just make the thing yourself. If you believe in it that much, you can do it for a very small amount of money.
We are out of time, but I just want to ask one very quick question finally to end. Is there all of you, is there anything you would say no to?
There's lots of things I'd say no to. I think you have to calculate the risk in terms of the story and the access that you will get on the ground and the limitations of the time that you have. So I think it's not something that I could say yes or no to right now. I think you have to be considered in your approach and make sure that what you're going to make is worth the risk in terms of what you get.
Stacey?
Yeah, no, I echo Ross, exactly that. You know, you should never say never, and if you're passionate about the story and there is a way you could do it in a reasonably safe-ish manner, then why not? Yeah.
I said no for the first time recently, and it didn't actually happen, but we did a film with ISIS where someone who knew ISIS before they became ISIS was invited by them to film with them for 2 or 3 weeks, and it was an incredible film, and he revealed an awful lot. They then said that he could come back with a correspondent. And I believe they could guarantee my safety, but just morally I wasn't comfortable with, it being so tightly controlled by them, and not being able to ask tough questions or go anywhere where they wouldn't want you to go. Doing that to the people who happily lop off the heads of journalists, that's the first one I've ever said no to.
Well, I always kind of initiate my own ideas, so, I'm in a lucky position because I'm generally living with them for such a long time. So, oddly, I think maybe there was something wrong with me, but people don't seem to come to me and say, how would you like to make a film about? It just doesn't happen, so.
Well, I'm delighted that I was asked to come and could say yes to being here to listen to your stories today. Thank you very much indeed to all 4 of you for being here. Thank you.